was a Boy Scout here 80 years ago, okay? I'm 93 years old, so 80 years ago. And when I was a Boy Scout here, all the guys from World War I were only in their 40s. So I knew most of the guys from World War I. And back in those days, this place was pretty lively. That was built by the late Millis.
For his daughter?
His daughter, who married Van Cleek.
Oh, okay.
And that's why they named the street.
Van
Across the
Cleek.
street, Van Cleek Road. And it was taken over by
What's the monument
Eleanor
sign?
Cole and her sister. Eleanor Cole's sister, neither one of them were married at that time. They had a gift shop over there for several years.
There, right?
I was over there right in front of the bandstand when the hurricane blew in about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I lived right across the street from Jimmy Colalo on Play Street, and I couldn't ride my bicycle, the wind was so heavy. But I was also standing in the same place when the Hindenburg went over on the way to burn up at New Jersey. I saw
Your
it.
fault.
And I'm telling you, it was big.
Was there I thought there was a trolley. I thought somebody told me there was a trolley that went down Main Street.
There was,
One of those.
but that was way before my time.
Right.
But I remember on the street where I was born, from LaCroix's Corner, what's the name of the damn street there? Pleasant Street. I remember when the tracks were torn up at the first part of the war. They tore the tracks up and everybody in Mills and Medway had the railroad ties, you know. Well, my father worked there for 35 years. And,
What did he do there?
he was an export manager.
Oh, cool.
So he was during the Depression years. He was
Yeah.
working for them.
Yeah. He started there in 1927, I think.
Those were the good
27.
days. Those were the good days of the 20s.
And he
right?
retired there in 55 because he had cancer.
But everybody knew Millis from Clico. pretty
Oh,
much,
sure.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. And you look on the maps today and it even says Clico Station.
Clico, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which
So
they
they were,
borrowed the name from French champagne, right?
that's right.
Oh, yeah.
You go up to the town office
Yeah.
Yeah.
and you see all the pictures of Clico Club.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, I'll tell you how that got there. LaCroix was the guy that collected all of this stuff. And he had a whole house full of it. And he wanted to sell it. Okay? So he contacted Julius Rosen, Vincent Gannon, and myself.
Was it Paul LaCroix or his dad?
Paul LaCroix.
Okay.
He was the guy that collected all of this stuff. He had a house full of it.
Yeah.
So we went over his house, and he said, I want $5,000 for it. Okay, and I said, well, I'll see if we can get the money. So anyway, I took pictures of everything to make sure that I got what we were going to try and get. So through my father, I knew the lawyer, Earl Kimball's lawyer. His name was Black, and he came from Providence, Rhode Island. And so I knew who Black was through my father. I knew how to get a hold of Black, and I did. So we invited him up. Julius Rosen, Harold Curran, myself, invited him up to, it was the little Clico restaurant, which is the office of where Rosenville is now. And I said, look, we need some money and for the Clico display. And he said, well, I'll give you half of it. I said, well, that ain't good enough. We need some more. Make a long story short, he gave us the money, and I gave it to LaCroix, and we put all the stuff up. Charlie Becky put it up with me, and Julie Rosen and again, and that's how it got there.
That's very cool.
And all the stuff on the wall, all the World War II stuff, World War I stuff, I put it all there. That was our room for the chemistry room when I was in high school.
Oh, that's
That's
right.
why there's all the glass on the sides.
Yep.
Did you talk about Ruboroid and what you used to make there and
What you did.
what you did there? And we're not going to talk about the stuff we buried.
Well,
And they just cleaned up.
as I told you, there was some of us in school that we went this in the first part of the war. When we were old enough, you could go to work at 14 years old. They changed the rules, and we worked at we'd go to school at 7 o'clock in the morning, get out at noontime, and some people worked in the shoe shops, and I went down and worked at Rubroy. So I learned to, because they didn't have enough people to run everything, I learned to run about it took 30 people to run the roofing machine. It was 400 feet long and 4 stories high. I left there and went into service and came back, and I went on the job. I took this training to be a tool and die maker in Rhode Island, and I was there for about a week. And George Saris, who was the general roofing foreman, came to Rhode Island because he knew me, of being there before. He said, I need you up to Rubroy. Get this job, come back to Millis. And I did. And I spent 26 years there. And I ran the night shift for years, and I became the general roofing foreman. So anyway, after I quit, Lynn Sand said, hey, we need a superintendent up there to run the quarry. So I went up there, and I was there 3 years, and I learned a lot about explosives, because we used to use a lot of explosives. And so I got into the explosive business. And anyway, I got in a fight with the owner's son, and I got fired.
Really?
All those families.
Millis had me down there one time going over the years. They wanted to know what was buried there, and I knew what was buried there because I was there. There was 2 freight cars buried down there, asphalt tankers.
Really?
And I knew where they were.
Are they still there?
They
No,
cleaned
they
it
dug
up
them up.
now, I think.
They dug them up. One was out back, and one was by the
Was
boiler
that
room.
recently?
Really?
Oh, GAF had you go back and tell them?
Yeah, years ago I did. Yeah.
That's so cool. So I wonder, did you see the sign in Niagara that has all the streets? And we were trying to figure out how they could tell where there was a fire. There was like this huge antique sign. It was all handwritten with the street
I know. I'm
names.
gonna kind of give it. I gave him one. I gave the one down town. I had a whole bunch of them.
Seriously? The big wooden one?
No, the cardboard one.
Okay.
Whoever would report the fire, the first guy would write on the board where it was, and then plug in the whistle, and everybody else that came around, all they had to do was look at the board, and
They would know where to go.
Or if they could.
Roach Brothers there was a sawmill there, and right out here, they couldn't get by this square here for weeks because there was a whole pile of big pine trees and they fell down like pickup sticks. Because you didn't have, in those days, they didn't have chainsaws, everything had to be crosscut saws,
Yeah.
But that's where the wood was cut up, was down there.
Oh, they took
Was there an airport in Millis?
Up in Isabickies, there were 10 planes at one time, and
Which is Oak Grove Farm now.
which is over on
That was along Ridge Street.
Yeah, and it started with a guy by the name of Leo Grasso, who came from Dover. And he had a, what they call it, World War I training plane. And he, on Exchange Street. And he'd fly over and he'd whistle. He said, holler down, send Shirley, and I'd hear the plane. And he said, send Shirley up the field, and the field was Isabickies. So he started flying in, because there was enough room to fly that damn thing in there. But at one time there was 10 planes up there, and Ernie Ramsdell and I used to, with our bicycle, used to haul gas from Lips's Tidal station, because it was the only station that had white gas in it. And you couldn't have lead gas in those old airplane engines. So we used to haul the gas up there, and
Did you get a fly? Did you get a ride?
never did. On my 80th birthday, and I'm now 93 years old, so it's 13 years old, and we were asked, the Legion was asked for the fellows to go up to the school and talk to the assembly about our involvement in World War II. And so there was 2 fellows ahead of me, and of course they got a little bit bored listening to it, and so it was my turn. I was the last one. And I said that I'm going to deviate somewhat. I'm going to tell you what Millis was all about during World War II. And so I started off, and this is my speech, and I thought it might be interesting because there's a lot of history in it. And it says, teachers, students, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Edward Bud Shropshire, and I am a townie. In a few months, I am fortunate I celebrate my 80th birthday. I was asked by Mary Payson to join others here at the high school and tell about our experiences during World War II. This in itself is fitting, for tomorrow is Veterans Day. However, I'm going to deviate from the norm somewhat and tell you what life was all about in Millis during World War II years. President Roosevelt declared war on the Axis powers December 9th, 1941, and again on Japan after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. During his radio speech to the nation on December 9th, this is what he said: "Every citizen in every walk of life shares the same responsibilities. The lives of our soldiers, sailors, and the future of our nation depends upon the manner in which each one of us fulfills our obligation to our country. First," he said, "we must speed up all existing production by working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and that will include industries that produces all the raw materials, and my friends, and that's what we did." In 1941, I was 14 years old, a Boy Scout in the first year of junior high. Millis High School became a different place back then. We were taught what war was all about and the part we were about to play. In the corner of the school hallways was a large container filled with sand and contained a shovel. We were instructed that if a incendiary bomb were to come through the building, we were taught to pick it up with the shovel and deposit it in the sand. Incendiary bombs contained phosphorus, which burns with great heat and very difficult to extinguish. They were dropped from airplanes in clusters for the only purpose of starting fires. In the auditorium, we were taught to march and instructed on the manual of arms with wooden guns. There were 2 airplane identification stations in Millis. Their purpose was to identify aircraft flying over Millis and to call into Central with the information on the type of plane and the direction it was going. One station was located on the roof of the Millis High School, and the other was on a tower on the Christian Herder Farm. High school students, including myself, and other volunteers manned these stations. The high school hours were changed from 7 o'clock in the morning start to 12 o'clock noon. Those of us who were capable would go to work in the shoe shop, the safe pack, and work the second shift. The average pay at that time was about 40 cents an hour. Many of us would work until 11 p.m. and go home and back to school at 7 o'clock in the morning. Not a whole bunch of time for homework in those days. We were lucky if we worked all week. We could make as much as $16 in a week. The mills in Millis were Safepack, now GAF, Joseph Herman Shoe. Safepack produced waterproof case liners for overseas shipping containers. What that is you take the paper that's similar to that in a paper bag and you laminate it with asphalt in between, and it makes it a waterproof paper. And then they would put it on large, at that time we had hired around 50 gals that I can remember, and they would put the paper would be cut in pieces, and the gals would put it on the table and they'd fold it to fit the containers for overseas shipping. That's what they did. Okay. We employed about 100 women to fold and crease the liners in various shapes and sizes. A separate section of the complex produced roofing shingles and roll roofing. This material was used to build army camps such as Camp Edwards on Cape Cod and Camp Devens in the western part of the state. The Joseph Herman Company produced shoes for both the Army and Navy, dress and work boots. They operated 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week during the years from 1941 to 1945. Because we used to come up from Plain Street where I lived and stand on the wooden bridge, and you could hear the stitching machines tick 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 all day long and all night long. The Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts would go door to door and ask people to donate various materials for the war effort. The Millis Legion would sponsor many of these scrap drives. We would collect aluminum, copper, scrap iron, paper, and cloth. This material was deposited at the railroad station. Where it went from there, I just don't remember. What we did was, I can remember my Aunt Lillian Mott, whose husband was in the service. She had a 32 Chevy, and she would pick us up and we'd go door to door, and I can remember going up by Glen Ellen to a house where whoever lived there, and a woman gave me brand new pots and pans that were aluminum so she could donate to the war effort. And a lot of people did that. There were many women who donated their time making different types of bandages for injured troops. There were sewing machines and equipment set up at the old Ellis School, located where used to be Rockville. You people know the old Ellis School up in Rockville? Yeah. Well, that was filled with sewing machines, and they made bandages in World War II. There was a lot of women that worked there. The government rationed just about everything. Each city and town had their own rationing boards. These boards contained a group of people selected to expedite the rationing as fair as possible. Food stamps were issued in small booklet forms. I should have brought some in because I have them. They were cardboard-like designed and contained red stamps for meat and blue stamps for produce, sugar, butter, etc. Gasoline was a high priority. On your automobile, if you had one, you were issued a letter that would paste on your windshield, the lower right-hand corner. It would be a letter A through F, just like your inspection sticker is today. If you had an A book, you were allowed 3 gallons of gasoline per week.
How much was gas?
8 gallons for $1 when I was in. 8 gallons for $1. If you worked in an central war industry, you would be issued a B, C, or D, or even E book based on the length of travel. Oh yes, if you had a 4-passenger automobile, you were required to carry 4 people. I was stopped several times with my 32 Chevy, and I just had one person with me, and they wanted to know why I was stopped and where I was going. That was done all during the war at that time. I'm here to tell you that when it came to gas rationing, it was bartering, conniving, swapping, stealing, and much more. In high school, I had a 32 Chevy Coupe, one of 3 cars in the school at that time, and I had an A book. When you went to the filling station attendant would take one of your stamps. Gas rationing was never a problem for me because after school I worked at the State Pack, which is Rubroid, where the asphalt was delivered by trucks from the seaport of Rhode Island. It was, I forget the name of the company. And when they would come down with their truckloads of asphalt, they would let us go out and siphon gasoline out of their trucks. So we had more gasoline than we knew what to do with. And automobiles tires were at a premium because of rubber was the most essential for our fighting equipment. Rubber tires for trucks, jeeps, tanks, treads, coats, boots, and much more. Rubber was imported from South America. Incidentally, I'm sure that you know that it was Henry Ford that bought several thousand acres down in South America to plant rubber trees to try to help in the rubber, to produce rubber in those days. Rubber was imported from South America, and synthetic rubber called butane hadn't been invented until 1942, and that's what tires are made out of today. Rayon was invented in about 1916. Nylon and the polyproducts hadn't been invented yet, so wool, cotton, and rayon were the essential for most all the clothing. Women's silk stockings were almost impossible to come by because silk was used to manufacture parachutes for our troops. Even the silkworms were required to work time and a half. Page 3. Bear with me, kids. All right. Blackouts were the law of the land. All lights and non-essential areas were to be shut down at night. Headlights on automobiles were painted black halfway down the lens as to lessen their glare. Each town street had its own air raid warden. His job was to walk through the neighborhood at night and make sure each house had its shades pulled all the way down. Some of our ships just offshore were torpedoed by German submarines because of the silhouette caused by the lights on shore during the first years of the war. And that, my friend, is pretty much what Millis was all about during the war years. Now for the fun part. This speech is supposed to last 10 minutes, so how am I doing so far? Millis High School in 1942 and 1943 played 6-man football. In 1944, we were able to muster enough men to play a team of 11. I played of every minute of every game both ways. We lost to our favorite enemy in Medway. They were kind of getting sick of listening to me, so I said, I got back to them 6 years later when I married one of their cheerleaders, and I got a rousing. And I did it, and that was Joan. She was the cheerleader at that time.
Yeah, that's awesome.
There you go, Johnny.
If you were in those years, Millis High, in order to graduate and receive your diploma, you were required to earn 15 points. At the end of my junior year, I fortunately acquired 14. Several of my classmates had already enlisted in the service, and others couldn't wait any longer. We were allowed to take a final exam by our homeroom teacher, Mary Downing Welch, which some of you might even remember. The exam was English literature. Gardner Rice, Donald Ingraham passed with flying colors, and I think a complete idiot could have passed that test, because all you had to do was write your name. For the reasons I can't remember, we get towards the end, kids. For reasons I can't remember, I decided to list in the United States Coast Guard, which incidentally is part of the U.S. Navy during wartime. We reported, there was three of us, Gardner Rice, Donald Ingraham, and myself. And we were ordered to report to the Coast Guard recruiting office in Boston on March 1st, 1945. To this day, I can't remember our transportation to Boston, but I'll never forget what happened when we got there. After swearing in ceremonies, we were put on a train bound for Grand Central Station in New York. Upon arriving in New York, we then were transported to the Coast Guard by a Coast Guard truck. I remember the truck. It was painted gray and had a number on it. I learned later that everything in the service had a number on it. Anyhow, the gray truck, loaded with young men from New England, finally arrived at the Coast Guard training station at Manhattan Beach in Long Island late in the afternoon. We were marched to a long building where we were given an armful of clothes, a big bag called a sea bag, 2 pairs of shoes, and 7 shots in the right arm. We were then ordered. It seemed that nobody asked us anymore. We just ordered to march to the barracks, among a lot of other barracks. The barracks were quite large. It contained 200 bunks, upper and lower head, and a head. I was quick to learn that a head meant toilet. Soon after, some guy in a loud voice hollered, "Turn out the lights." By then it was quite late and very dark. Some with a trumpet played something over a loudspeaker, and then all systems were quiet. Later in the night, I heard somebody crying, and somebody shouted, "Shut up, you blankety blank baby." We found out that morning that the guy who shut up last night had a lot more to say. He was a large man in a white Coast Guard uniform with a lot of stripes on his arm, and he was a bosun mate, and his name was Shagan. He informed us what we were going to do and when we were going to do it, and where we were quite sure he meant every word of it. The next 4 weeks of training on Manhattan Beach were interesting and informative. We were marched to classes, even classes how to kill people. On march, everywhere we went, it seemed that those people liked to march. After 4 weeks of basic training, we were allowed to choose the branch of Coast Guard we were interested in serving. I always was interested in anything to do with the ocean, so I asked for sea duty. Shortly after, I was transferred by truck to 14 New Chambers Street in Lower Manhattan. From a small hotel, we marched to an old ferry boat where an equally old sea captain schooled us on steam pumps and triple expansion steam engines. These engines were used on most Liberty ships in the part of the war. They were later replaced by steam turbines. Liberty ships carried most of the supplies and equipment to the Europe and Pacific operations during the war. Mass production, I think, produced Liberty ships were produced, the convoys, approximately every 3 days. It is recorded that the United States lost 800 ships in World War II. From the ferry boat, I was transferred to a Naval War College in New York, where I studied evaporation systems. This is the process of making fresh water by boiling and condensing salt water. On completing that course, I was ordered to join the crew of the USS Monticello, AP-61. Picture of it's on the board up there. AP-61 stands for Earth Armed Personnel Attack. Everything had a number, which was docked at the naval base in Norfolk, Virginia. We loaded 7,000 troops for replacement in Europe. I heard it was for the 101st Airborne. We shipped out to sea, and our destination was Naples, Italy. We headed south around Bermuda, across the Atlantic, up by the Azores into the Mediterranean Sea. The southern route, I was told, was chosen because German subs were in the North Atlantic, and our twin turbine propelled us at 28 knots, and we could outrun the speed
of submarines only could do 18 knots at that time. It took 3 days to unload and reload the troops. We saved our hitch and headed back for the good old USA. I was not a hero. I would have liked to have been, but where I was, the war was always someplace else. When I was fighting in the north, when I was in Italy, the fighting was in northern France, and when I was in the French ports of Le Havre and Marseille, American troops were crossing the Rhine River into Germany. I made 6 trips across the Atlantic, or 12. I was about 25 feet below the waterline in the bilges and saw little about anything that was going on above me. But my experiences were 10 minutes. And probably I'm over that by now, which I probably am. I might be interested to tell you about the USS Monticello, my ship. My ship was 650 feet long, 10 inches long, and about 2 football fields. It had a beam. It was wide of 72 feet 6 inches. It weighed 32,000 tons. It was armed with 5-inch guns, 3-inch 50s, and a whole bunch of 45 caliber machine guns. She was operated by a crew of 494 men and carried 7,000 troops. And on my watch, we ferried 42,000 people across the Atlantic Ocean. In closing, I'd like to tell you about an enjoyable experience in my wartime career was when we returned from Europe and entered New York Harbor past the Statue of Liberty and docked at Pier 8 with our troops. They had spent the past 3 years fighting for the freedom that we all enjoy today. Bands were playing, mothers were there, wives and girlfriends were waiting. Wow, what a reunion, I'll never forget it. And then the end. Parts of interest. The United States Coast Guard, formerly named the Cutters, was commissioned by George Washington October 4th, 1790. The Coast Guard fought in every major war since the beginning of the Declaration of Independence. In World War I, the Coast Guard lost more men proportionally than any other branch of the service. World War II, 230,000 men and 10,000 women served as part of the United States Navy. We manned 351 naval ships, 288 Army vessels, and 802 landing craft. On January 1st, the Coast Guard was returned to the Navy Department. In conclusion, can this insanity ever end? Yes, it can. As I look back over the microphone, I see the youth of America. You, the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, and all the young people are better educated, smarter than my generation ever was. The future of this world belongs to you. You can, you must, you will, break on me. You can, you must, you will, with God's will, bring everlasting peace to this world of ours. Thank you.